So the cloud adoption framework actually has a lot of steps for organizations or IT teams to start assessing their existing environments first, and planning the stage before they modernize and migrate to Azure. And then the well-architected framework allows the team, whoever is involved, developers, engineers, or architects working in that migration project, to think how they're gonna think about architecting for the cloud in a way that it meets all the pillars in terms of resiliency, performance, architecture, and everything, security, for example, that they need to think about.
Welcome, friends, to the Modern.net Show, the premier .NET podcast focusing entirely on the knowledge, tools, and frameworks that all .NET developers should have in their toolbox. We are the go-to podcast for .NET developers worldwide, and I am your host, Jamie Geprogman Taylor. In this episode, which is the final one of Season 7, Jonah Andersson joins us to talk all things Azure, the many pathways involved in migrating and modernizing .NET applications and publishing to the cloud.
So one tool that I actually highly recommend when it comes to .NET, there is a plug-in plugged in for Visual Studio actually for .NET, and even I think with Java, there's a tool called AppCut plugin, and it's like a modernization tool that is part of the Azure Migrate that allows .NET developers or whoever working in the migration project with .NET that they can add it plugged in Visual Studio, and they can assess their existing source code, .NET source code, based on the well-architected framework, if it's ready or not, or there are gaps in the code.
Along the way, we talk about Jonah's podcast, Extend Women in Tech Podcast, which I would highly recommend, and her book, Learning Microsoft Azure, Cloud Computing and Development Fundamentals, and why she chose to write it. Anyway, without further ado, let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET Podcast, and we'll dive into the core of modern.NET. Jonah, welcome to the show. We've been chatting about getting you on the show for a while now, and I appreciate that it's been quite busy for you. We'll go into that a little in a minute, because you're a very busy person, prolific content creator, prolific developer, prolific everything. So first off, I guess, welcome to the show.
Yes. Hey, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me here at the Modern.net Show. It's a pleasure and honor to finally make time to chat with you and be part of your show in this episode. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being on the show. To put a little bit of historical it's from this year, but to put a little historical context into this, Jonah and I got chatting at MVP Summit earlier this year in March 2025 about, I'm very impressed with your work, and would love to sort of pick your brains and talk about the things that you do and the podcast that you create on this show, alongside some technical subjects as well. Just because, the way I see it is podcasting is collaborative rather than competitive. So if I can talk about you, then that's great. So let's do that. So we'll talk about a little bit about you. We'll also cover things like the book that you have out, like I said, the podcast that you produce, and we'll maybe dive into some stuff to do with Azure, or for our American friends, Azure, and we'll talk about that kind of stuff. How's that sound?
That sounds great, and I'm also very glad that we met at the MVP Summit. I know that you've been trying to reach out to me on LinkedIn to be part of your podcast. So I'm very glad that we found time. So that sounds great. I have a lot of things to share, both technical and non-technical, and even inspiration to those listeners that we have in your podcast.
Amazing. So, how about we start with a little bit of a bio of you, right? The kind of work that you do, that kind of stuff. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. So, hi everybody. Thanks for listening wherever you're listening this episode right now, on the YouTube channel, on the podcast channels that Jamie has. I'm Jonah Andersson. I live in Sweden. I am originally from the Philippines and moved to Sweden about like 13, 15 years ago. And I work daytime as a cloud DevOps lead in a remote project, or also has a label of senior Azure consultant at a company called Solidify. I also have my own company, Jonah Andersson Tech, where I put in my royalties for my book or IT trainings that I do for Azure or cloud development. And very active in the community as a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm actually a lead from Sweden as well, so helping out the MCT community. And also an MVP for Azure and the leader and founder of Azure User Group Sweden. And on my spare time, I try to advocate inclusiveness and diversity in tech or women in tech community through podcasting on my spare time, along with another developer here in Sweden. And it's called Extend Women in Tech Podcast. And other than that, I also wrote a book, Learning Microsoft Azure, my first book ever written at O'Reilly as my publisher. And it's a book about fundamentals of Azure and the result of my cloud migration journey as a developer, junior developer back then, that ended up learning a lot about Azure because of that experience and lessons learned. So that's a brief description about me. I have a lot to share to inspire you, but I hope that we can do that on this episode.
Sure, absolutely. So let's quickly talk about the Extend Women in Tech podcast and the work that you've done to try and boost the inclusivity and equity within the dev space. Then, what does that look like? If someone's listening into this and going, "That sounds like an amazing thing," because they will be, and they think, "Hey, I should be listening to this podcast." Because they should be. Like, what kind of things, what kind of topics come up on that show?
Yes, actually, the topic of the show is about a mix, but the highlight of the Extend Women in Tech podcast is to lift up women in tech or anybody, if you're a student, someone professionals that has high level positions already in IT. It's interviewing them about their stories. So the topic is all about the person that we are interviewing. And we usually focus on how they got inspired into working into tech. They don't need to be a programmer or a developer, but how they got very interested in working in IT. And then usually part of the show, we ask them about the technical skills that they have, like what are they working on day to day as in IT. And then finally, like at the last part of the show in every episode, we ask them what are the top 3 advice or few things, top advice they have for others, juniors, I mean, regardless of gender, that they want to inspire out based on their experience or story. So basically, the topic is the speaker itself or the guest of the show, and it varies. It can be about programming, front end, and recently I think we had interviewed someone who spoke about accessibility, development and the importance of having accessibility engineers in a project, for example, which actually made me interested and learned a lot as well as someone who only works a lot every day with code or cloud or DevOps.
Right. That's yeah. I mean, I'm a subscriber to the show anyway. So
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
I,
thanks.
you're very welcome. So I do think that everyone should be listening to the Extend Women in Tech podcast, because it's a very important subject of, like, how do I put it? I've been at conferences in the past. This is quickly becoming a inclusivity thing, and I don't think it's my place to talk about this kind of stuff. But I was at a conference before. I won't say what it was. It was within the last 10 years, so that doesn't help round it down, which is good because I don't want to name names. But I was looking in the I was one of the speakers. I was looking in the speaker green room, and everybody looked like me. And for those who
Yeah, all
don't know,
guys.
yeah. So obviously,
Mhm.
I'm male presenting. I'm I think the older term is Caucasian, but I guess white British would be the word you would use. I was wearing a hoodie. I had a beard. Like, everyone in the room looked like me. And that, in my
You
opinion, is
clone
not great.
yourself, Jamie, in
That's
that
exactly
room.
it, right?
Yes.
And the whole point behind diversity and equity and inclusivity is that the more voices we have that are from a different background and a different perspective, the better ideas we will have. It is that simple. It's just a case of maths, right? Statistics says that if you have more people with different views, you'll get different solutions to the same problems. And by doing that, you're opening your mind, right? It's kind of along the lines of like travel broadens the mind. It's the same thing. Diversity, equity, inclusion broadens the mind and makes the team better. Alex, that's my opinion of it. And I may be completely wrong. Am I wrong? I don't know.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Jamie, on that. And I think those that I actually, since I started public speaking and standing on stages, I actually in the last few years I have increased my followers on LinkedIn to from 500 normal connections to almost 1500 15,000 now. And sometimes I question myself why did it increase? I mean, it's for me it's not about numbers, but for me it's more about fulfilling my why and passion to share knowledge out and inspire others actually in tech. I mean, that includes women in tech, but even like fellow developers like me, male, female, or whatever, gender or age. But I can tell a story about how I started public speaking. So I've shared and I have been very transparent that I used to be very shy standing on stages until the past like 6 years or 7 years ago, as a consultant working with .NET development or even Azure at that time, I had the opportunity to teach kids programming in schools here in Sweden. And I saw that in the classes where I was teaching block programming, Lego Mindstorms, and all this JavaScript based programming to younger generation, I saw that there were only a few girls or female students that were interested in what I was talking about. And it's almost the same thing situation as what you experienced also at that conference 10 years ago, where you see similar, like you see yourself and nobody else. So it was like me, the opposite way, that I could see there's this room is dominated by boys very interested about learning logic and programming, but I see these few girls that kind of like not not so they look like they didn't think that programming and learning IT or tech stuff was fun. And that made me sit back at the back of the room and realize, hey, they're thinking wrong. I mean, I used to be very shy, but I
Mhm.
work with programming in .NET. I work with cloud. I like logic. I like to be creative. They should think that this is fun. So to make the long story short, without saying a novel, that actually inspired me to start getting on stage for the first time, and then started sharing knowledge about what I do at meetups and events where I'm invited to. At that time, that was pandemic, so most of my first community talks were virtual. But that led me also to share a lot, and that caused me to be nominated as MVP. And that's how I kind of like gained my status and name also in the community within Europe or across the globe as well. So I think I can relate to you, and I do agree that inclusiveness is very important, not just in tech communities or conferences, but also in IT teams that we have or any place.
Absolutely. And like the way I see it, right, is that if someone like you isn't willing to stand up and say, "Hey, I'll give this public speaking a go and try to inspire others," then who will, right?
Yeah.
I just want to applaud the the brave nature of you going right. I can see this. I can see the change that needs to happen. I'm gonna be the change that I need to see. So, I personally applaud that. So, that's great.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And I think that the bravery I did to get out of my shyness from public speaking to standing on stage have this mission to inspire others actually is something that I carry with me every time I get on stage or speaking in podcasts when I'm invited. So it inspires me as well.
Right. Excellent. Oh, man. Yeah, we do need a big. It's a long fight, I think, but we need to fight the fight of literally anyone can do this. You don't have to be any specific gender identity or genetic makeup or anything like that, right? And I think looking around at other industries, I think tech is, whilst it isn't 100% accepting, we still have a long way to go. I feel like it's
Yes.
more accepting than other uh, industries and other workplaces. If I think of like mechanics, right, first thing that pops into my head is a male mechanic working on a car, right? Whereas if I think software developer, as long as no one uses any gendered pronouns to say software developer, I can't think of a specific, like, what that person looks like, right?
Yeah.
I can't see that identity and that's how it should be. There should be no solid identity for that particular industry. I think that it should be completely fluid. That it could
Yes.
be a person of any gender identity, of any background, of any, race or any other kind of identifying features. If you were to identify someone with those features, it should be anybody, right? I think at MVP Summit, Scott Hanselman wore this brilliant T-shirt that had like a dictionary definition, and it said inclusivity, and it talked about how it should be, everybody's involved and all that kind of stuff, and then it said second definition, y'all, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's awesome. Yes. I like him. He's advocating a lot for the developer community with inspiration.
Mhm. Excellent. Okay. So let's talk about real quick. We've got lots of different things that you do, and I've scribbled a whole bunch of stuff down whilst we've been talking. So we have, you've got the book that's come out, and we're going to talk about migrating apps up to Azure, and using the CLI as well, the AZD, which the episode hasn't come out yet at the date of recording. So we're recording this May 16th, 2025. The episode isn't out yet, but I recently recorded an episode with Maddie Montequilla where she made fun of me for how I say AZD, because she obviously says AZD because she's American.
I think I would say it ACD as well. Maybe because I learned how to speak English the American way when I worked as tech support for American companies.
Sure.
But it's fine.
Yeah, as someone from England, or Britain, or like, I see myself more as a European person. We've drifted properly into politics. Let's pull that back. As someone who was raised in England, I can't bring myself to say Z. You could hear it as I said Z. Then there's this weird pause, this long sound in there. I just can't. It has to be Z, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Everybody speaks differently. Let's move on.
Yes, that's great.
Cool. Okay. So what about this book that you've got released then? Very, very, very interesting. That's published by O'Reilly as well. So, what's the book called? What is it about, and where can folks find out about it?
Yeah, so the book that I wrote, my first book that I wrote, that I never written before, but I wrote it. It's called Learning Microsoft Azure, Cloud Computing and Development Fundamentals is at O'Reilly. And you will know it. It is my book because you will see a big blue parrot, which is the hyacinth macaw. So if you've been a technical person reading books of O'Reilly, they usually have animal book covers of endangered birds or endangered animals. So the book has been released for over a year now. I wrote the book on my spare time. Aside from a full-time job, for about 16, 18 months. I supposed to finish it a year, but O'Reilly has been kind to me and understood my schedule. And I have involved a lot of MVPs and community members or friends into the book. So if you read it, you'll see a lot of names that probably you know. But literally, the book is the result of my journey as a .NET developer, junior developer at that time, that were given a mission to migrate an on-prem legacy app from that is like very old, 10, 15 years old, no documentation, spaghetti code everywhere, and move it out on-prem to Azure. And at junior developer at that time, I actually learned a lot, and I'm glad I did, because that allowed me to write this book. And it's translated now, I think, in at least 7, 8 languages. Recently, it's been translated to Chinese and Japanese, and it's there's an ebook version of it, there's a paperback version, and there's also an O'Reilly's platform. So if you search it, it's on Amazon, and it's on some major bookstore, at least worldwide.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
Um, and that kind of leads nicely into the topic that we're going to talk about, which is migrating tips, I guess, and the process, I guess, behind migrating from an on-prem, like you said, perhaps not very documented, perhaps even .NET Framework, if you're really unlucky, application that's sitting on a server somewhere under the stairs, in the cupboard, in the back room somewhere, maybe even under your desk, and putting that on the cloud, right?
Yeah.
And maybe potential pitfalls and benefits and stuff behind all of that, and then how we go about it with like the AZD. Sorry, it took me a moment to get that one out there.
I think we can connect it, actually, because like once you're in the cloud, you also want to improve the infrastructure part, which is also some things I work day to day in my job as a senior consultant leading the cloud DevOps team. But what do you want to know first in the cloud migration? I mean, do you want to know the things to think about and stuff?
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning, right? Let's
Mhm.
start. We'll put ourselves back in that same position you were in when you first
Yes.
started writing the book, right? So I am a software developer, and my project manager, program manager, customer, whatever, has come to me and said, I need to move this to the cloud. I don't know why, but I need to move it to the cloud. How do I do that, right? What's the first thing that you should be thinking about in that situation?
That's a very amazing. It's like what I'm feeling right now is a deja vu, but it's like I have to travel from the future to back in time at that time. So if I were to answer my boss, manager, asking me to migrate a legacy application that's like outdated, I would I would start with of course. Of course, it's dependent what it is, right? So, I mean, you can migrate an app that is .NET, Java, and then when it comes to cloud platforms, you have the option for Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and you also have the option to either fully cloud on one specific platform, or you're gonna do multi-cloud or hybrid cloud because of a use case. But I would start first with let's just say it's .NET, a legacy app that I had, not well documented. Different developers have sitted in that, coding their own style, and it's a messy database that they have. I would consider starting with the tools that Microsoft Azure has, which is the CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure, and also the WAF, Well Architected Framework for Azure. So the Cloud Adoption Framework is actually has a lot of steps for organizations or IT teams to start assessing their existing environments first, and planning the stage before they modernize and migrate to Azure. And then the well architected framework allows like the team, whoever is involved, developers, engineers, or architects working in that migration project, to think how they're gonna like think about architecting for the cloud in a way that it meets all the pillars in terms of resiliency, performance, architecture, and everything, security, for example, that they need to think about. So those top two like frameworks or tools are a good start. And also part of it is truly educating and giving this awareness to IT leaders that are leading that project, migration project, and even the teams that are working on that project, that they truly believe in the capabilities of the cloud as well, that they're really educated about the basics. Because, when you're migrating legacy apps to Azure, it's not just about moving to the cloud. I mean, you don't really need to move everything in the cloud. You need to understand what problem it solves,
Right.
what are the services that suits Azure services that suits your use case, and how does it solve the problem? How are you going to monitor and maintain it? How are you going to secure it? How will we adapt to new technologies that's going to happen, and even business use case that's going to change? So there's a lot. Did you have any thoughts on this before while I pause? Because I can talk about this without pausing. But what's your thought on this, Jamie?
So yeah, I agree completely with the pragmatic approach of
Yeah.
what benefits and what do we gain from this, and how it isn't just migrate to the cloud, just push a button and push it up onto the cloud, right? You definitely need to think about, are you going to be Azure? Are you going to be AWS? Are you going to be GCP or any other cloud provider? And do you want to put all of your how do I put it? All of your eggs in one basket, right? Do you want to be multi-cloud or do you want to be single cloud? So no, I agree. And I think that there's a lot of thought required going in, right? I've been in several industries and several job roles where a program manager or a project manager will come to me with a harebrained scheme of, I've had this idea, right? That's the worst sentences you can ever hear from a project manager. I've had this idea, and I remember one time I was asked, can we put it on the cloud, but also run it on prem, but also run it on two clouds and put blockchain in it? And I'm like, boss, this is like a login system. How are we going to put blockchain into that? And he's like, I don't care. I've heard about it, and apparently it's brilliant. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of thought needs to go into the why, right? I I often tell people that the most important thing is to understand the why. And I'm glad that you kind of brought this up really early without really directly mentioning it. You talked
Mhm.
about your why behind why you do
Yes.
talks and why you are trying to inspire a lot of people. And yeah,
Mhm.
so I will always ask, hey, why do we need to go to the cloud? Right? Is it because you've heard wonderful, brilliant things, or are we seeing a problem that the cloud will solve? That's my initial thoughts right there.
Yeah, I do agree with the why, because I think I do agree because many, I mean, based on my experience, at that time, that's exactly how I felt. Like my manager just wants to move to the cloud without really carefully planning strategically how we would go about it and why, and the process, who are the team that needs to be involved. And it was really tough for me, that migration experience, that really inspired me to write this book, because I was the only developer maintaining the system in production, killing the bugs, making new features while the system itself is very old and it needs to be modernized. But I think not really having this why and motivation why you're moving to the cloud, and even starting small. Like, for example, there are many projects like legacy apps right now that are probably have been built in production and they're huge. They expanded over time. But those that really want to move to the cloud, they are in rush. Sometimes you need to take baby steps or mini projects in iteration when you move to the cloud. So one tool that I actually highly recommend when it comes to .NET. There is a plug-in plugged in for Visual Studio, actually, for .NET, and even I think with Java. There's a tool called AppCut plugin, and it's like a modernization tool that is part of the Azure Migrate, that allows .NET developers or whoever working in the migration project with .NET, that they can add it plugged in Visual Studio, and they can assess their existing source code, .NET source code, based on the well-architected framework, if it's ready or not, or there are gaps in the code. And I think with Copilot built in Visual Studio, it can also help out with cloud migration and rethinking on how to refactor for the cloud, for example. So there are many baby steps required, and it's not just moving out to the cloud, because once you're in the cloud, I mean, once you have the code prepared, you need to think about the databases. Are we going to modernize the databases? Are we going to use like NoSQL or SQL? We need to think, are we going to use infrastructure as code, for example, Bicep or Terraform, or we're just going to do the clicking on the portal or the cloud platform? So a lot of things. Not all leaders think about that, especially if they're on a different language as well.
Sure, yeah. And of course, if you're deploying, and both are still entirely valid, right? If you're deploying on-prem, you probably have the server built and it probably has everything you need, and you can just either right-click publish or build something into your deploy scripts that says, hey, go poke at this machine and push it there. Whereas if you're deploying to the cloud, I guess, you have to really think about how is this app going to be hosted, right? And I guess especially like you said, those non-technical leaders who have the ideas of let's move it over here. You need to then sort of put it to them that, yeah, cool, the cloud is someone else's machine, but we also need to tell the cloud how to host it, right? Whether it's we're going to split it up, whether we're going to have multiple databases, whether we're going to have what's called failover, that kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be discussed. I'm really interested about this Visual Studio plugin that you were talking
Yeah.
about. Because I feel like that could perhaps help with that sort of planning, right? Because I guess before, let's say we've figured out the why, we figured out where we're going to host it. How do we go to that planning stage, right? Because obviously, if I put a program or project manager hat on, I can't just say move it to the cloud. I need to know how long it's going to take and how many engineers, right?
Yes, that's right. So when it comes to the planning part, of course, there are a lot of things or steps to think about when it comes to planning. And as I said, shared earlier, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework is a really good start when it comes to like thinking about strategy and how to get started. So if you like, for those that are listener, I mean, we are in audio right now, but if you go to aka.ms/CAF or CAF, you'll be able to see the guidance there. But I think the first start is to assess your project. Like usually, in the first phase of the cloud adoption framework is that you're gonna assess your cloud adoption strategy, and part of it is you need to determine your motivations, your mission for the projects. It's like literally what we're talking about, why we do what we do. And it goes the same with cloud migration as well. Like anything that we do that motivates us, we need also a motivation why we're doing this. Are we going to cloud? I mean, migrate because we're fixing a technical debt and we want to be competitive globally with using cloud services? Or are we going to modernize because we have a pretty good, but we want to have more capabilities like reliability and all the good stuff of the cloud? And you need to, of course, like part of the strategy phase of cloud adoption framework is you need to define who are your team, your cloud superheroes that will lift this on-prem to the cloud, maybe part of it, but you need the right people that truly knows what they're doing. Because when you're moving this like legacy apps to the cloud, you might tweak the code base by refactoring, but you also need to rethink which kind of platform as a service are you going to use based on your use case or what the application does. Let's just say you have a lot of event-driven kind of scenarios in your application, so probably some parts of it needs to be re-architected to use Azure functions or durable functions, and maybe some part of it can make use of you just literally using app services with API management, or maybe some part of it can utilize the benefit of like Azure Container Apps or Azure Kubernetes on Azure. So those things are a lot of factors to think about. But I think the strategy, the strategy part, the first step, is important. And then the next phase of cloud adoption framework is the planning part. That's when you choose your strategy, which projects start, like POC, proof of concept, or first project to be built for the cloud. And then you ready, adopt, and you do the governance in terms of security as well, and a lot of things. So there's a big, huge of guidance, at least in this framework for CAFT and WAF, that I wish I had when I had my cloud migration journey. Because when I did my migration as a junior developer in that one, I didn't have all this documentation. So this is the reason why I wrote my book and share about cloud migration a lot as well.
The following is a paid advertisement. Welcome back, .NET enthusiasts. Today's special episode of the Modern .NET Show is brought to you with the help of Jamie Taylor, a renowned expert in software development and artificial intelligence. You may recognize his name from your favorite episodes, but did you know that he plays an even bigger role at RJJ Software? As our lead consultant, Jamie has guided numerous businesses to unlock their digital potential with bespoke solutions tailored to their unique needs. From crafting cutting-edge software to integrating advanced AI technologies, he's been pivotal in transforming challenges into opportunities. If your company is seeking a partner who can provide expert guidance and deliver exceptional results, look no further than RJJ Software. With Jamie at the helm of our consultancy team, we guarantee that we won't just meet expectations, we will exceed them. Dive into the digital future with us today. The audio for this advertisement was created with AI.
Sure. I do like the idea that there's lots to think about, lots to work on. And I love the idea of proof of concepting first, rather than just going, sure, boss, I'll just move this to the cloud. And then you find out 6 weeks later, actually, I can't move this to the cloud, perhaps because it's using some dependency that requires some random thing that like a USB to be plugged in, right? Maybe we're using some licensed software and we need a USB device to be plugged in to provide that license key or whatever. Can't move that to the cloud. But then I suppose at that point you can then maybe look at slicing parts of the app away and putting that on the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So is that something that you would maybe recommend? So let's say we've gone past the point of how do I put it? We've gone past the point of initially coming up with how we're going to move it. We've done a POC. We've figured out our app uses these dependencies, uses these patterns. Cool. So I can just right click and publish, right?
I wish that was, I mean, that would a beginner would do in a non-prod environment. Right click and publish from Visual Studio. I used to do that when I was a junior developer, but that's not the real world is about. So when I was in this project, cloud migration project, because we didn't have a CI/CD pipeline in that project, so literally I have to code, packet all my DLL files in my Visual Studio, copy and paste all those files to a virtual machine that was on-prem, and do it the dinosaur old way. But in the modern .NET development today, especially with cloud native and Azure, I think it's not just about publishing it from Visual Studio. It's pretty standard right now, a good standard to at least have a CI/CD or DevOps pipeline. So we either integrate your code where your repository is to Azure DevOps or through GitHub or any other tools like Bitbucket that does the CI/CD pipelines. When a developer pushes the code, then it's going to be deployed to the cloud. And personally, what I use every day a lot from development to DevOps to the cloud is I work with Azure DevOps. So I help our team set up their pipelines also to Azure, and I also help out build the infrastructure using infrastructure as code like Terraform or Bicep. So it's not just pushing the code. There's also a new kind of like technologies like infra code for automation and pipelines for automation that really helps developers work with the productivity as well.
So I guess the first thing, before I've even figured out how to put it onto the cloud, I may need a DevOps pipeline, right? If my
Yes.
app has been using perhaps a right-click publish, so then I can then say to the boss or whomever, hey, I actually need to spend some time working on getting this thing ready to go up to to the cloud by building out this pipeline, this description of how I'm going to build my app. Because, and I say this a lot, right? It's entirely possible for folks to still be doing a right-click publish. That is still a relevant way of publishing your apps.
Yes, it is.
If it gets you to the app as on the server, be that on the cloud or on-prem, then that's totally a valid way of doing it. It's not
Yeah,
best
it is
practice, but
still.
it's a valid way of doing it. So then that
Yeah.
means then that I need to spend some time before I've even, so we even need to dial back even further, right? We've got the why, we've got buy-in from whomever is paying the bills. I've started to look at how do we push out to it. Maybe Azure is the place to go. Maybe Azure, however you want to pronounce it, is the way to
Mm-hmm.
go. We're hosted on maybe Bitbucket or Azure DevOps or GitHub, and I know how to publish from there. I guess I need to then take another further step back and say, right, I need to do more experiments and maybe build out my DevOps pipeline, right?
Yes, that's right. So that's part of being not just the coding as a .NET developer, but also learning how, at least truly understanding how the CI/CD pipeline works when it comes to like this automation when you push and then it gets published. But I mean, aside from that, I mean, I want to back one step because uh, aside from preparing the code that you have, let's just say .NET app, you also need to prepare. Let's think about like cloud development with Azure on Azure. So you have the code in .NET, but you also need to think about cloud infrastructure resources where you're going to push or deploy your code. It can be an app service or functions, but you need to prepare your infrastructure as well. So that's this when you prepare, like, do you have app services ready in Azure already? Do you have it in infrastructure as code? You created it that way. So once those two are prepared, that's when you can configure your CI/CD pipeline because it's going to build your code. And then there's a next step of the CD, which is continuous deployment, which is the release part. And once the build code is packaged as an artifact, it needs to be deployed through, like, from the repo to an app service, for example, and build it for the cloud. So those parts of the cloud development is important. And then once you have it deployed, you also have to make sure that, like, for example, your app configuration settings in an app service or function app are secured. Of course, you don't push your secrets on the repo, especially public repo, but on Azure and an app service, for example, we use Azure Key Vault, where we retrieve our secrets, is a secret management tool in Azure. Another way is that you can protect your applications by having like Microsoft Defender for cloud and monitor it as well, because it is hard. It's not easy to debug an application hosted in the cloud if you don't have any kind of like monitoring tools. So for Azure, the commonly used tool is, for example, Azure Monitor or App Insights. So that allows us to see like 500 errors or 400 errors that's redundant or happening failures on an app that's already in production. So, yeah, I hope that answers your questions or your thoughts, Jamie, about the next steps.
It does, yeah. So, like, So we've convened a group of devs and perhaps some ops people and maybe some DevOps people. We've put together a build pipeline. We've figured out how we're going to package up our app. We've decided maybe for now it'll just be an app service, because maybe it's just an API, right? So
Yes.
I'm looking at it. Let's say we're building an ASP.NET ASP.NET Core Web API, and I know I'm going to push it to an app service. And we've got secrets management figured out. We're probably going to use whatever systems Azure has. Maybe I'm reading from a secret store. Maybe I'm reading from a key vault or something like that. I've decided that, cool, we're going to be ready. We're going to push that to our CI/CD pipeline. The pipeline is going to build our stuff. There is this then deploy step that's missing. I can maybe go and learn about how to do that from the Microsoft documentation because I'm pushing to Azure. But I need to figure out, am I pushing it up as an app service and here are my files? Or am I containerizing it? Because I know that containers is a web thing, right? And I know
Yes.
that I'm making a logical leap here because I've done it myself. I know from my own experience that sometimes it's better to containerize that app, because then we can containerize everything about it and just say to the cloud vendor, here is my container, go run my app, right? So I'm thinking more maybe if it's a .NET framework based app, I could probably containerize that if there is a container that is able to run a version of Windows and version of my app and things like that, right? That's a little bit harder to manage, but maybe that could be my first step, is just push that out as a container and just run this. Is that a valid
Yes.
step?
Yeah, that's also a valid step, another use case. Yeah, so app services also has the support for like containerizing app. I mean, the benefit of like putting applications into containers is of course it's faster than virtual machines, but it has this flexibility of like not being tied to an operating system. You can just package it, put it in a container. And in Azure, there is a lot of like, you can use the app service with the support for containers, but there's also like their dedicated service for containerization, which is the Azure Container Apps. And even if you need orchestrations, there's AKS as well, and even functions. I did a talk recently in Global Azure London about how you can, and I also spoke about this on Microsoft Ignite on a short theater session, that Azure Container Apps has a support that you can put in Azure functions inside of it. So if there's a use case that suits that. So there is this flexibility of like what kind of Azure service that you can use based on your use case or your preference or technical requirements. And this is when the basics of cloud comes in, like why I wrote my book as well. Because if you don't know this wide of variety, we have to be honest, Microsoft Azure has a lot of services. It's categorized based on what you need. We just talked about cloud migration. It has a group of things, framework to follow. But if you're a developer very new in Azure, how would you know that Azure function is the best suitable like solution for your use case if you don't know all this like basic at least? But what I can at least guide to help developers is that there's actually, if you looked at Microsoft Learn documentation, there's actually a guide. It's like a flow. I can maybe share it later to you, Jamie, but there's a flow when to use container apps, when to use Azure functions, and when to use app services. It really depends on what you're trying to comply or meet in your like architecture as well, or use case. So a lot of things, and then it's interesting that that you also asked that questions or brought up the containers as well, which is also a good service. And not many people are aware that they can containerize their applications, and it's working pretty well in some use cases as well.
So I guess then, based on what you were saying, how do I know what my app is and which offerings, right? I mean, you asked yourself, right? So I'll ask you the question right back at you. How do I know that that my app is a function? How do I know that my app could be a static app? How do I know, how do I know that I can containerize my app and run that as an Azure web app? Like, is this stuff documented, or is it all in your book? Like, how do I how do I figure it out?
Probably I did mention part of it. I have 14 chapters in my book, so I started with the basics, but I did have a dedicated chapter for cloud development, specifically for developer tools and even DevOps, and even about cloud adoption framework and architecture. But I mean, if you're a .NET developer, this is a modern .NET show. So if you're a .NET developer, I recommend the Microsoft Learn start page or landing page. So if you search Azure for .NET developers, it will give you a lot of guidance on how you can create web apps, cloud native apps, like how you can build with AI today, even creating mobile apps with Maui. So there's like a mobile app. I remember I also I also used to do mobile development, but that time that was Java because I could code Java as well. But there is a lot of options that you can use with Azure for .NET, and there's an SDK for Azure as well. So Azure SDK for .NET allows developers to develop with Azure, and even the AI Foundry that came out also allows .NET developers to use AI tools and build with it. So I would start, let's just say, if you have an event-driven app, like an app or a use case that requires event-driven scenarios, I would consider using Azure Functions to start with in Azure. However, if you have an architecture that probably requires containers or microservices, I would consider look into Azure Container Apps or AKS. And then if you have a static web apps or just a simple one, there's this Azure Static Web Apps. And then for normal .NET apps or even Java, actually, it has a major support for Azure App Services. So it really depends on what you're at. But those top four options is like the standard. And if you're someone like me that also not just develop code, but I also work with cloud infrastructure, like for example, I help my team set up connections from the dev environment or repositories to DevOps to Azure. So you have to create this DevOps agents. So we use Azure virtual machines also as our agents that runs jobs and data loaders through the virtual machines. So that's when you consider using infrastructure as a service such as Azure VMs. So it depends on the use case, but there are documentations that I can share or they can look up as well. Just search for Azure for .NET developers. Then you're in a pretty good landing page for all good stuff that Azure and .NET can do.
And of course, one of the other resources that listeners should be getting is your book, right?
Yes. So, So if you want to learn about Azure, feel free to check out my book. I know that my AI chapter is outdated after a year because of the speed evolution of AI that came. So when I wrote my book a year ago, I had to change the chapter of AI because Copilot came. I mean, ChatGPT, and then after a year, a lot of AI stuff came. But I'm currently working on going through reading my own book and going through what chapters I need to update based on what's new in Microsoft Arena or Azure Arena and AI Arena. But first edition is still pretty good chapter, especially if you're learning the basics of Azure and get started as a developer preparing for certifications for that. So yeah, watch out for the second edition as well, maybe next year.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check your podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. you could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Sure. And I can imagine that, you said there that AI is moving pretty quickly, that
Yes, it
trying
does.
to keep up with it would be, in a printed form, would be suboptimal, non-trivial, not so easy to do.
Yes. How are you doing with it? I have a question back to you because I'm very transparent and honest. I work a lot with .NET, cloud, DevOps. I know what I'm talking about and I work out, but I feel like I still need to catch up with AI development today. So I have certified myself with the AI fundamentals, but I'm really working and looking into how I can build with AI Foundry or AI tools. But how are you doing or coping up with your learning and development for AI and .NET, Jamie?
So
Your
for
strategy?
me,
Yes, yes.
for me, it's been, I'm doing everything locally at the moment. I am using a few AI APIs in the cloud, so maybe I'll use the Azure OpenAI API. I always have to pause between AI and between AI and API because I do exactly what I just did then. I fall over my words. But so what I'm doing at the minute is I'm building a bunch of apps locally that use, I have a runner called Olama, which will run a bunch of models on my machine, and I run against that. And when I'm happy with what it's produced, I'm then going to point at the cloud because it's cheaper to do it on my computer for that initial ideation, right? Then when I'm happy
Yes.
with that sort of initial ideation, I then point at a cloud provider, maybe Azure OpenAI API, or maybe just the OpenAI API. There's a difference, but it's in the governance. So Microsoft assure you that your data is not being used for training for the Azure OpenAPI, the Azure OpenAI API, but there is no such assurance with the OpenAI API, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So most of my stuff has been interacting directly with the models in a conversational manner. I am looking into MCP, the model context protocol, I think it is. The model control product. I don't know. Whatever MCP stands for. Everything's
Yeah.
changing so
I
quickly, right?
also learned about that recently, and I feel like I need to look what is that. And I know there's a lot of talk about. I learned a lot also because I spoke at a global Azure, and there's a lot of topics about Azure AI. And there's of course, AI Foundry is something I need to look into, but there is also this like that MCP that you mentioned, and then also like new things coming up, like AI agents can talk to each other. And I'm not even into like building my own AI agent and teaching it, but it's very interesting. This new technologies that are evolving today. But it looks like, or it sounds like you're up for a great project, and I think it's smart that you start locally because I know cloud costs. One of the things that also factors that we talked about cloud migration. One factor that can actually, is important to think about is the cost of the cloud. So it's not just building for the cloud. The cost of the cloud is also expensive. And if you're building with AI as well, you have to think about the cost and how expensive it can be. So it's not free. So these are the factors developers have to think about. So any open source or free tools is always good to use while you're still learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, my thought on cloud versus on-prem, right, is that if you're hosting on-prem, your initial cost of buying the server rack or whatever, that is essentially the cost of running on-prem. The other cost, of course, is ensuring that you have some kind of load balancing or that you can respond quickly to requests. The
and that's usually like a one-time upfront, or your costs can be front-loaded. But with cloud-based stuff, it is very much you're I can't think of the opposite of front loading. I don't want to say back loading because I don't think that's a sentence that makes sense. But like, you're pushing the cost from, I'm going to spend, $2,000 on buying a server rack and installing all the software. You're then swapping that out for, I'm still probably going to spend about $2,000, but it's going to be spread over 6 months, 8 months, maybe a year of cloud hosting, depending on how much traffic you get and how many resources you have. And the other cost, of course, is that once you have the server on-prem, you can create as many environments as you want. You can have a dev environment, a QA environment, a UAT environment, a staging environment, whatever you want, a candidate environment, an alpha environment, beta environment, live environment, whatever. Because they're all running on the same machine. You own that machine. But if you're pushing to the cloud and you want to create separate environments, you've got to recreate everything. And depending on which buttons you press and which options you choose, it's going to cost you twice as much for having 2 environments, 3 times as much for 3 environments, 4 times as much for 4 environments.
Yes, cloud is expensive. That's why also like going back to the why, your why and what, and all those other factors in terms of what are you going to move to the cloud, what are you going to modernize, is very critical decision. And I always I wrote a book about Azure, but I also encourage when I speak about cloud modernization that, hey, you don't need to completely move everything to the cloud. Utilize what are the good stuff in the cloud. Think about the costs and the good stuff that you will gain in there. But if you also can gain benefit of having some parts on-prem, like your own private data centers, that's also good. You can synergize both worlds down here and up there. But actually, Azure, I think I wrote in my book also the option for hybrid and multi-cloud. So there's a tool probably the audience have heard, or probably you have heard also, Jamie, is the Azure Arc solution that includes Azure Local. So that is also a scenario that organization can think about if they prefer to have some parts on-prem and utilize some of the maybe platform as a service, cloud services in Azure as well.
Sure. And that makes sense, right? Because if you can split your app between in a hybrid model or using Azure Arc or something like that, then you're initially reducing that cost, right? Because we all need some kind of dev environment or some kind of QA environment that represents live that isn't our machines, so we can test for things like latency and things. So if you can have that on a server somewhere, or have it as a hybrid hosted model, that would greatly reduce that cost, especially for if you're having, maybe if you have a team of 200 developers all working on one product. That would be a very fast-moving product. But if you've got 200 developers working on one product and they're all pushing changes all the time, you're going to be constantly overwriting that dev environment, and you'll never actually be able to test anything, would you?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, that would be a good case also to have a few things on-prem, especially for non-prod environment. But if ever there's a use case that, in the real world scenarios, usually you have the dev environment, the QA for the QA team, the staging are you at for for the business folks to test before it goes to production. Those the typical 4 environments. But usually if you really need to have this, if you have cloud native and you really need to be on the cloud, there's actually a typical subscription in Azure that's called Azure dev/test, which is typically cheaper than a normal subscription. And if you're an Azure partner or you're utilizing their hybrid benefits, you can actually have cheaper price on the subscription that you're working in non-prod. And there are free services as well in Azure that those that are non-prod projects can utilize as well.
Yeah. I guess a question on that then is, how do you know which ones to use? So you said that there are some sort of again, I know the answer to this, but I'm asking so that hopefully somebody out there who maybe is listening along knows that they want to ask this. You're saying that there's some sort of paid tier of Azure resources and some sort of free tier of Azure resources, some free
Yes.
tier that I can use for dev test. So how do I know which ones need to be free and which ones need to be paid? And if there's a free option, why don't I just put my app on the free version, right?
Yeah, that's the tricky part because I mean I'm an Azure MVP. I use Azure at work and even personal, but of course cloud providers always want to have money. But as advocates of the technology and someone using it, we don't work for Microsoft. We are honest about like things where we can save money. And there is actually free services in Azure, but you have to be specific in finding them. I mean, there are actually, if you Google it, you can find out, but there are specific tiers in terms of like Azure Functions, Cosmos DB, SQL database that are non-prod and free, almost literally cost nothing as long as you have a subscription. So in your Azure portal, usually when you search, there's a menu on the left side that says all services. And then when you go in there, you can filter for Azure services or partner marketplace services, and then categorize by security, compute, and all this stuff. But somewhere I think in one of the options, there's free services. So when you click on that, you'll see the tiers and the type of services that you can avail for free. And I usually recommend this to my students because I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I teach Azure fundamentals and Azure development to developers or consultant here in Sweden or wherever I'm asked to teach. I tell them that if your company doesn't allow you to use your work account to play around with Azure, try out the free services or at least make use of the sandboxes that Microsoft Learn has. And that's free. You don't need to pay for it for just learning and trying to get your hands-on these technologies.
No, I agree with the with using the Learn. So learn.microsoft.com, and they're free offerings. The sandboxes on there. I work with a lot of students in sort of my local area. And I do that rather than doing it online because then I can go and sit with them if they get stuck. And one of the things that I often say is, hey, if I'm a little busy right now, I will get back to you as soon as I can. But go have a look at this page on Microsoft Learn, and it's covering the same thing. But I need you to have a look at how they recommend doing it. Maybe that will answer your question. And it is a great way to learn, right?
Yeah, it is. I always believe that if there's a will to continue to do continuous learning, which is a great mindset to have as a developer or as a human being, I think there's a lot of free resources today. Of course, my book is not free. You need to buy it. I can give you a discount for a signed copy. You can buy it on Amazon, but I wish it was free. But I spent a lot of hours, I think 300 hours in that book and through my publisher. But other than that, there is actually a lot of free resources on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and if you follow other MVPs like us, MVPs around the community, you'll be able to see that they're really passionate about sharing their knowledge to those that are willing to learn. You just need to be like, find your mission, like go back to the why. Why do you want to learn Azure? Why are you coding .NET? Why do you want to do that job that you're doing? Or why are you aiming for that career? That's the big first step actually in finding your why. And then if you have that 100% motivation that you got this why, then the rest will flow freely like a magic. So it just flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to let folks know that if you don't know about it, there is a Find an MVP sort of search that Microsoft have. So if you put into your search engine, find an MVP, or you click the link that will be in the show notes, you can actually search for a person in your area who is an MVP in a specific technology. And usually I cannot volunteer anyone, but usually you can click through and find their social pages. So you can go, oh, this person is on X, this person is on Blue Sky or whatever, and click a button and actually get in contact with them. it is in public, so like you can say, hey, I'm having can I have a chat with you over DM or whatever? I've had a crazy idea and I'm a bit stuck. Can you help? Sometimes they will help, sometimes they won't. But there is that feature. So if you want to get in touch with an MVP, or rather if you want to get in touch with an MVP that's not Jonah or myself, then you can use that service too. That will probably help you to find other folks in your. And guess what? If you run a meetup or a conference and you want an MVP there, and you can go drill down to like a geographical area and say, get me all the MVPs in the area. Oh wow, my conference is on .NET and there are 12 MVPs in the area. Maybe I can reach out to them to see if they want to come along to my conference.
Yes, that's a good place to start actually. And most MVPs are very passionate about the technologies they're awarded for. So if you notice, I'm a .NET developer, but my MVP category is Azure. But I'm very close to combining the .NET and Azure, because they work pretty close and synergize pretty close together. And it's always good to encourage and motivate, inspire other developers as well, especially those that are just beginning in their journey. So technology doesn't need to be scary. It needs to be fun and creative and logical and community. That's why community. I believe that community makes it more inclusive somehow and welcoming and more fun to learn.
Absolutely. So with all that being said, then we're running out of time. We're talking about keeping the fun in the learning. Let's just remind everyone a little bit about you, remind everyone about the Empower Women in Tech podcast, and remind folks about the book as well, just as we're sort of wrapping up.
Yeah, so I want to thank, first of all, Jamie, for inviting me to be part of this episode or podcast. We did discuss a lot of great things from my journey, what I do, .NET, cloud migration, and in my book, and also like things to think about when you're developing apps for cloud. But if you have more questions about Azure, .NET development, even cloud infrastructure, DevOps, feel free to check out my book or reach out to me or follow me on social media. I'm very active on X and also LinkedIn. You feel free to reach out and follow my content there, and I'd be glad to help. And I also have podcasts, Extend Women in Tech podcast. So regardless if you're a male and a female, if you have something to share about your tech story, you are welcome. It's just the name that I have, Extend Women in Tech podcast. We did interview one actually MVP that shared about how he was inspired about the podcast and wanted his daughter to listen to it as well. So check it out. I also have a user group in Sweden where I host virtual meetups bi-weekly every Saturday with another AI MVP from Norway. And if you are someone who wants to learn about Azure, we have recorded episodes in our YouTube channel. We have a meetup scheduled actually in a week or so. We share a lot about Azure technologies. And if you are someone that wants to share knowledge, we don't just welcome MVPs, we also mentor and welcome those that are just getting started into technical public speaking. So reach out to me. I know how it feels to be scared on stage. So just learn and just be brave. And thanks for listening to us in this episode.
No worries. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, for sure, Jonah. It's been
thanks, Jamie, for having me.
You're very welcome. Excellent. Well, I guess all that really remains to say is that I've had a wonderful time, and thank you for being on the show. And awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for having me, and enjoy.
Thank you everyone for listening to this episode of the Modern.NET Show with me, Jamie Taylor. I'd like to thank this episode's guest for graciously sharing their time, expertise, and knowledge. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at the podcast's website, that's .NETCore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher or whatever you're listening to this episode through. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that. Reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact, or join our Discord server at .netcore.show/discord, all of which are linked in the show notes. But above all, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope I'll see you again next season for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks.